Akosua had always believed that true freedom was a dream woven from whispers and starlight, something distant yet worth every fight. But in the village of Abansu, where tradition held the hearts of its people in an iron grip and betrayal came from the hands you trusted most, freedom was more than a dream, it was a battle, and the price was higher than she could ever imagine. The sun dipped low over the small African village of Abansu, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch the space between its traditional way of life and the creeping influence of modernity. The villagers, while still adhering to ancient customs, were not immune to the changes brought about by education, technology, and migration. For some, like Akosua, these changes represented an opportunity. For others, like Kwame, they were a threat to the control they had over the people. Akosua, 25 years old, stood at the edge of her family's compound, gazing at the narrow dirt road leading out of the village. Her dark skin glistened under the setting sun, her eyes reflecting the inner conflict she felt. She had always been a dreamer, yearning for something beyond the thatched roofs, dusty streets, and judgmental eyes that surrounded her. Intelligent and ambitious, Akosua had earned the highest grades in the village school, and her teachers had encouraged her to pursue further education in the city. But her family, steeped in tradition, believed her place was in the village, married, and obedient. Her thoughts were interrupted by her mother's voice. "Akosua, come inside. It's almost time for dinner," her mother called from the kitchen, where the smell of boiling yam and plantain filled the air. Akosua sighed and turned toward the house. She knew the conversation at dinner would once again circle around the same topic, her marriage to Kwame, the wealthy businessman who had taken a sudden interest in her. He was older, powerful, and, in the eyes of many in the village, a suitable husband. But for Akosua, he was a symbol of everything she was fighting against. A life of submission, a future without choice, shackled to a man who saw her as little more than an accessory to his wealth and influence. As she sat down to eat with her family, her father spoke, his voice heavy with authority. "Kwame has asked for your hand in marriage, Akosua. You must accept. It is time for you to settle down. He is a good man, and he can provide for you." Akosua's heart sank. "Father, I want more than a marriage. I want to go to the university, to study, to be my own person." Her father's face hardened. "That is nonsense. Your duty is to this family and this village. Kwame is your future." Akosua fell silent, knowing that further protest would lead to more conflict. But deep inside, she knew she could not allow herself to be forced into this marriage. Her only ally, her childhood friend Amma, had promised to help her find a way out. Amma, however, had been distant lately, and Akosua couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. The following day, Akosua sought out Amma, hoping for a moment of solace and strategy. They had always been inseparable, sharing dreams of leaving the village and making their mark in the world. Akosua believed Amma understood her desire for freedom, but lately, Amma had been spending more time with Kwame. Akosua had dismissed it as Amma trying to gather information to help her, but doubt crept in. Amma was waiting by the river, where they had spent countless afternoons talking about their futures. The air was thick with humidity, and the sound of the water was a soothing backdrop to their conversation. "Amma," Akosua began, "I can't marry Kwame. You know this. I need to find a way to get out of it." Amma, her face calm but her eyes betraying a flicker of something darker, hesitated before responding. "Akosua, maybe. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Kwame is wealthy. He can give you a good life. Think of your family." Akosua's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying? You know I don't love him. You know I want more than to be his trophy." Amma looked away, unable to meet Akosua's gaze. "I'm just saying that maybe this is the best option. Maybe it's better to accept your fate than fight it." Akosua was stunned. "Why are you saying this? You've always been on my side. You've always wanted more for me." Amma's silence was deafening. A cold realization washed over Akosua. "You're not trying to help me, are you? You're helping him." Amma finally met her gaze, her eyes filled with guilt. "I'm sorry, Akosua. I didn't mean for it to happen, but Kwame offered me something I couldn't refuse. A better life, a chance to get out of here. I had to take it. Akosua felt as though the ground had crumbled beneath her feet. Her best friend, her confidant, had betrayed her. You sold me out for your own gain, she whispered, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. Amma reached out, but Akosua stepped back. I thought you were my friend. I trusted you. I am your friend, Akosua, but I can't turn down the opportunity to have a better life. You're strong. You'll find a way to live with this, Amma pleaded. Akosua shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. You don't get to decide my future for me. I'll never forgive you for this. She turned and walked away, leaving Amma standing by the river, the weight of her betrayal hanging in the air like a thick fog. Days passed, and the pressure on Akosua to marry Kwame intensified. Her parents, unaware of Amma's betrayal, continued to insist that the marriage was her only option. The village elders spoke of tradition and duty, reinforcing the notion that Akosua's desires were irrelevant in the face of her responsibilities. Kwame, ever persistent, began visiting Akosua's home more frequently, always with gifts in hand, gifts meant to woo her family, to cement his control over her life. He spoke of the wealth he could provide, the comfort and status she would gain as his wife. But Akosua could only see the bars of the cage he was building around her. One evening, after yet another visit from Kwame, Akosua's father pulled her aside. Akosua, you will marry him. This is not a request. This is what is best for you and for this family. Akosua, her voice steady but filled with resolve, looked her father in the eye. I will not marry him, father. I cannot live a life that is not my own. Her father's face twisted in anger. You have no choice. You are a woman in this village. You belong to this family, and your duty is to obey. You will not disgrace us by refusing Kwame. Akosua clenched her fists, her heart pounding. I will not be a prisoner in my own life. Her father raised his hand as if to strike her, but something in Akosua's defiant gaze stopped him. Instead, he stormed out of the room, leaving Akosua standing alone, trembling but resolute. That night, Akosua knew she had to leave. She couldn't stay in a place that sought to control her every move, where even those she loved were willing to betray her for their own gain. The village, with its mix of tradition and modernity, had no place for someone like her, someone who yearned for freedom. Under the cover of darkness, Akosua packed what little she could carry and slipped out of the house. The village was quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the night breeze. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she knew she had to leave. As she walked along the dirt road that led out of the village, her thoughts raced. Could she survive on her own? Would her family ever forgive her? Would she ever forgive herself for abandoning them? The road stretched ahead, winding through the dense forest that surrounded the village. Akosua's feet ached, but she kept walking, driven by the fire of her need for freedom. She didn't know what lay ahead, but anything was better than the life that awaited her if she stayed. But freedom came at a price. Hours later, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Akosua found herself standing at the edge of the forest, her legs weak and her body aching from the long journey. In the distance, she could see the outlines of the city, a place she had dreamed of but had never seen. The city represented hope, but it also represented the unknown. And for Akosua, the unknown was both thrilling and terrifying. With a deep breath, she took her first step toward the city, leaving behind the village, her family, and the betrayal that had shattered her trust in the people she loved. Months passed, and Akosua found a place for herself in the city. It wasn't easy. She had no money, no connections, and no real plan. But she was determined. She found work in a small shop, saving what little she could, and eventually enrolled in a night school to continue her education. The city, with all its chaos and challenges, became her sanctuary, a place where she could reinvent herself. But even as she built a new life, the pain of her past lingered. The betrayal of Amma, the control of Kwame, the disappointment of her family, these were wounds that hadn't fully healed. The nights were the hardest. Alone in her small rented room, Akosua would often replay the events of her departure in her mind. Could she have stayed and fought harder? Could she have convinced her family to see her side? Was there any way to have avoided the deep, painful betrayal from Amma? Amma's betrayal was the hardest to accept. Akosua had trusted her completely, shared her dreams, fears, and aspirations with her. Yet, in the end, Amma had chosen selfishness over friendship, using Akosua's struggles to secure her own way out of the village. It was a wound that cut deeply, and Akosua often wondered if she would ever be able to trust someone in the same way again. But as the months turned into a year, Akosua found a new strength within herself. Her studies progressed well, and soon she earned a scholarship to the university. She was learning about the world beyond the village, discovering philosophies, ideas, and people that expanded her mind. For the first time, she felt in control of her own destiny. The city, with all its challenges, had become a place of growth and discovery. In the freedom she had sought so desperately, Akosua found herself. 2 years had passed since Akosua had left the village. She had become a different person, shaped by her experiences in the city. The wounds of betrayal had healed, though the scars remained. She had learned to forgive herself for leaving her family behind, but forgiving Amma and Kwame was another matter entirely. Despite her new life, Akosua knew that she couldn't run forever. She had to confront the ghosts of her past if she was to truly move forward. And so, with a heavy heart, she made the decision to return to Abansu. The village was much the same as she had left it, though time had aged its people and weathered its structures. As Akosua walked through the familiar streets, she felt a sense of unease. The villagers watched her with curious eyes, whispering behind their hands. They had heard of her success in the city, her escape from the fate they believed should have been hers. Her first stop was her family's home. Her mother embraced her tightly, tears streaming down her face, while her father, though initially distant, eventually softened. They had missed her terribly, and though her decision to leave had caused them great pain, they were proud of the woman she had become. But not everyone welcomed her return with open arms. Amma, who had married Kwame shortly after Akosua's departure, was a shadow of the vibrant woman she had once been. The weight of her decisions had left her bitter and resentful, trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who had only seen her as a replacement for Akosua. Kwame, as controlling as ever, had stripped her of the independence she thought she was securing when she betrayed her friend. Akosua had expected to feel satisfaction at seeing Amma in such a state, but instead, she felt a deep sadness. Amma's betrayal had been driven by fear and desperation, and now, she too was paying the price for her choices. The inevitable confrontation between Akosua and Amma came one evening at the village market. The tension in the air was palpable as the two women, once inseparable friends, stood face to face. "I didn't think you would ever come back," Amma said, her voice hollow. Akosua met her gaze, her expression calm but firm. "I had to. There are things that needed to be said." Amma lowered her eyes, guilt weighing heavily on her shoulders. "I'm sorry, Akosua. I was weak. I thought marrying Kwame would be my way out, but instead, I ended up trapping myself in a worse prison. I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong." Akosua watched her closely. Part of her wanted to lash out, to make Amma feel the pain she had endured. But the other part of her, the part that had grown stronger in the city, knew that anger would only drag her back into the past. "I've forgiven you, Amma," Akosua said quietly. "But I can't forget what you did." Amma's eyes filled with tears. "I don't expect you to. I betrayed our friendship for my own selfish reasons, and I've regretted it every day since." Akosua took a deep breath, letting go of the last remnants of bitterness. "We can't change the past. But we can learn from it." Amma nodded, wiping her tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but thank you." As they stood there, the weight of their shared history hanging between them, Akosua realized that this moment was not just about forgiving Amma. It was about forgiving herself, too, for trusting so easily, for not seeing the signs, for running away without closure. Though Akosua had found a way to forgive, she knew that true freedom came at a cost. Her decision to leave the village had severed ties, not just with her friend, but with her entire community. The bond she once had with her family, though mended, was not the same. Her place in the village was different now. She had changed, and so had they. Kwame, still as controlling and self-assured as ever, attempted to reassert his power when he saw Akosua again, but she was no longer the same woman he had tried to claim. Her defiance, her independence, had grown stronger. He, too, was trapped in his own world, one of wealth, power, and control, but it was an empty world. Akosua's return to the city marked the final chapter of her journey. She had confronted her past, faced the people who had hurt her, and found the strength to forgive. But the cost of her freedom was the loss of the place she had once called home. The village, with its mix of tradition and modernity, was no longer a place where she belonged. As Akosua boarded the bus back to the city, she looked out at the familiar landscape one last time. The fields, the trees, the narrow dirt roads, they would always be a part of her, but they no longer defined her. She had made her choice, and with it came both loss and liberation. In the city, Akosua continued her studies, eventually earning a degree and starting a career in social work. Her experiences had given her a deep understanding of the struggles faced by women like herself, women caught between tradition and modernity, between duty and desire, between freedom and fear. She began to use her story to help others, mentoring young women who faced similar challenges, guiding them towards self-discovery and independence. In helping others, Akosua found her own redemption, a purpose that gave her life meaning beyond the pain of her past. Akosua's journey had not been easy, and the freedom she had fought so hard to achieve had come with sacrifices, her friendship, her place in the village, her family's trust. But in the end, she had found something far more valuable, herself. Standing at the edge of the city, looking out at the horizon, Akosua felt a sense of peace. The pain of betrayal, the conflict with her family, the struggles of the past, all of it had led her to this moment of self-awareness and strength. She had learned that freedom was not just about escaping the chains of others, but about finding the courage to face the consequences of her own choices. And in that, Akosua had finally found her place in the world. Her journey was far from over, but now, it was hers to shape.